Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the latest in holiday deck technology. And for today's deck tech, since I just mentioned holiday right now, we're going to be going into the historic format again to do a mini deck tech to celebrate our independence. Again, if you have seen my channel in the past, we do every 4th of July an American style themed deck. And this year we're going to be looking at an all artifact Air Force that we're just calling, actually I kind of just messed it up right now. I'm keeping that in there. It's basically Artifact Air Force. We're making a ton of Thopters and trying to go off to see if we can smash our opponent high in the sky. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content so you don't miss out on any of the gameplay, booster pack openings, deck decks, and so much more. But as always, before we get started with the whole deck tech, let's explain again the stats like we always do. So again, we're going to have an average mana curve about 1.5, so this is super low to the ground and super sweet for us. We are of course doing an American style, so that means Jeskai colors of white, blue, and red. Actually, I think that's red, white, and blue. You get the idea. In any case, we're also going to have total in the deck 14 actual creatures. We have 27 non-creature spells. To break that down specifically, we are using 4 instants, 27 artifacts, but also that does include the creatures themselves, 12 enchantments, and 2 battles with 19 lands. Real quick, I also want to mention the backstory of how this deck came to be. So I kept asking myself, is it possible to make a deck that is not only American themed, i.e. Jeskai, but also can be fun and also super duper janky? I mean, that's kind of how I envision America right now.
Well, we're Americans. We don't quit just because we're wrong. We just keep doing the wrong thing until it turns out right.
So, as I just mentioned at the beginning of the video, our whole purpose, of course, is to make a ton of Thopters and either destroy our opponent while we're flying high above their creatures, or we're going to focus on trying to make some boots on the ground creatures, i.e. 4/4 construct creatures, and just overwhelm them with the amount of damage we can do, just smashing them no matter which way we go. We can, of course, find an easy and very versatile way to victory. So let's break down again what makes Thopters. So we have an Ornithopter, which comes in for free. We have Cope of Garipur, great card. Of course, when it does some damage, we can then sacrifice if we have to then prevent our opponent from casting non-creature spells, protecting us and our game plan. We have ways of creating Thopters using Retrofit or Foundry. They can come in, of course, as servos, which we sacrifice to make Thopters, and we can sacrifice again to make 4/4 construct artifact creatures. Other spells in the deck that we'll focus on, of course, those Thopters will be Yotia Declares War. We have also a card that I actually have seen nobody play, so I'm going to play it because it's super janky, and of course, why not? We're going to have Goldforged Thopterix. This dinosaur Thopter is pretty awesome, actually. It has Flying and Lifelink, it's a 1/3, and also it reads, each legendary permanent you control has Ward 2. That doesn't really seem like it does much for us, but we actually do have a couple of key legendaries in our deck that we actually would like to protect. So actually, this is pretty synergistic and highly underrated. I think more people should be playing this card. Finally, we have also another card that actually also no one plays. This is Invasion of Kaladesh. So Invasion of Kaladesh, it's a 4 counter siege where it says it enters the battlefield and creates a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying. And then if we can then complete the battle, we flip it into Aetherwing Golden Scale Flagship. So this legendary artifact vehicle has power equal to the number of artifacts we control. So you might have already figured out this is actually one of our surprise finishers that a lot of people never see coming. I love this card. And of course, as far as how we pump up all of our Thopters, because as you may have figured out, Thopters are not exactly a very strong set of little critters, but they can do some great damage if we give them an extra buff. So we have 3 ways of doing that. I just mentioned earlier the Yotia Declares War. This eventually, when it gets to its 3rd part, then can turn any one of our artifacts we control into an artifact creature, making it a 4/4 until end of turn. Or we can also use Insult Artifact. I also love this. This is also one of my favorite pet cards. Throw this onto one of your artifacts so it becomes a 5/5 creature with addition to its other types. Michiko's Reign of Truth is more of an incremental, more of a mid-game or late-game style finisher, where also it gives one of our creatures a +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact and enchantment we control. We have a couple of enchantments as I just showed you right now, so this is an excellent card. Just save this for the mid to late game to get the most value out of it. Speaking of additional value, we also have a couple other cards that are going to help us with our game plan. As you may have noticed, we don't have that much in the way of card draw, so in the early game you can also cast Esper Sentinel, which will hopefully get us at least a couple extra cards before it goes away. Otherwise, your opponent will have to pay the tax, and sometimes that also can save us from our opponent throwing them off on their game plan and mana curve. As for a slight removal in the deck, we have Portable Hole for the early game just to get rid of some pesky 1s or 2 drops that we don't want to have to deal with. And other ways of protecting ourselves, we have Metallic Rebuke. This card has Improvise, so that means it's cheaper if we can tap artifacts to pay for the cost, and then counter target spell unless if its controller pays 3. As far as how we can then reutilize our cards, should come as no surprise to anybody, but we definitely are going to take advantage of Loris. I know, some people are not fans of Loris, but hey, we are an American deck today. As you can tell, we are obviously a non-budget deck, so we're going to have to go all out and abuse anything and everything we've got to make our win.
It's what the founding fathers would want.
As far as your land base is concerned, you have 2 plains, some Hollow Fountains, and Sacred Foundries as your dual lands to cast all of our other cards that have multicolors on them. We're going to have a copy of Bonder Enclave. Honestly, I actually had in the early draft of this deck a Mirrex, but I honestly didn't think the Mirrex was helping us that much. It didn't really give us the tokens we really needed because they couldn't block. So honestly, I think Bonder's Enclave is also a highly underrated card, and in this deck, it actually works perfectly well. Yes, it is a little expensive at 4 mana to draw a card, and also you have to activate this only if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, but the good news is, again, the Retrofitter Foundry can make for us constructs that are 4/4, so we actually can draw if we are struggling and we have to grind out against our opponent. Some Darksteel Citadels. You can also actually put your Enso artifacts, FYI, onto the Darksteel Citadel, or you can also use your Yotia to turn this Darksteel Citadel also into a 4/4, so that's actually a pretty hidden way of getting some extra ways of putting more creatures onto the battlefield. And then finally, to round out the package of lands, Spire of Industry. Yes, you'll have to pay the life to do it, but remember that a card such as Goldforged Thopters also has lifelink, so it's actually not going to hurt us too bad if we take advantage of this card. Now, keep in mind that this deck is honestly designed for best of 1, but if you want to take advantage of it in best of 3, here's what I would recommend personally for my little jank brew we've got. We have Authority of the Consuls. It's also kind of on flavor with the way American politics are concerned. But in any case, Authority of the Consuls realistically just forces our opponent to have their creatures come in tapped and gain us some life so we can stabilize against aggro decks out there. A copy of the Black Staff of Waterdeep so we can turn on any one of our artifacts into a creature where we can use it as a last minute chump blocker. Flowering of the White Tree from the new Lord of the Rings set is actually really good for us. We can pump up a lot of our Thopters to do a little extra damage, and our legendary creatures actually get a 2/1 in bonus, so that means cards such as Loris. If we flip over our invasion into Aetherwing, it actually does even more damage than anticipated. If we have to build up an army of additional creatures, we can also bring in Third Path Iconoclasts, switching out the invasion if we need to, just to have a giant army to chump block against decks that go wide against us. And also, they're soldiers, so I figured that's also a little on flavor for the deck as well. Hushbringers are only brought in as a way to stop our opponents from their ETB triggers from going off. None of the creatures in our deck actually have ETB, so Hushbringers is a solid card to bring in if you are going to play the best of 3. Speaking of additional things you also can use, we have Rip Apart to destroy either an artifact or enchantment, or if we have to get rid of a creature or planeswalker in a pinch. And then finally for Graveyard Hate, we have Unlicensed Hearse. The card will get really, really big as we keep exiling cards from the graveyard, even if it has to be ours, and then we can also use it as another way to finish off our opponent, depending on what their game plan is. But otherwise, that is the whole deck for you in a nutshell, everyone. So tell me in the comments below, what do you think? As we are talking right now, I'm going to leave, of course, some gameplay footage of you and provide for you some last-minute tips because, again, even though I know this is going to be a very short video, I just wanted to have some fun with another way we can enjoy the holiday. For those of you that are Americans, whether you celebrate or not, just have fun with this deck. Honestly, this deck actually also started as just the usual Boros Artifacts deck and splashed in some blue, which was honestly kind of boring for me. And I kept thinking of a way that maybe we can have something a little bit more jankier and more hilarious. So I've actually grown to really like this deck a lot, and it's actually surprisingly a lot more fun for me to play than I thought. So I personally am going to keep this in my collection so I can rock this deck for a little bit later on. If for those of you out there that are interested in a budget version, if you look at the main deck, and I probably didn't mention this earlier, but the main deck minus the lands only comes out to about 11 to 12 rares total. So this is actually a budget game plan. If you actually want to make it that way, you're just going to have to replace your Hollow Fountains and Sacred Foundries, mostly with just some tapped dual lands. So keep that in mind if you do want to play this on a budget. And again, if you want to cheapen it even more, you can just get rid of the sideboard and just play this completely in best of 1. Otherwise, my final thoughts I'm going to say on the deck is, as you see with the footage, it's surprisingly a lot more powerful than people estimate, because a lot of people don't have ways of answering or even responding to cards like Aetherwing. Remember that, again, as I mentioned earlier, Goldforged Thopters will protect cards such as your Aetherwing when it flips over after Invasion of Kaladesh. It will protect Hope of Girapur until you are ready to sacrifice it to prevent your opponent from casting non-creature spells. It will protect cards like Loris, and if you do bring in stuff from the sideboard, it'll also protect your Flowering of of the White Tree and your Black Staff of Waterdeep. The reason why I mentioned this again is because you will have some matches where you will get blown out because your opponent is either going to wrath the board, or maybe they're going to start blowing up target artifacts against whatever your game plan is. But the one thing I do want to emphasize that is the strongest point of this deck is it is very easy to either get a surprise smash win out of nowhere when you have the right enchantment on the battlefield, or if your opponent does force you to grind it out, even though we don't really have that much in terms of raw card draw, you do have many ways of grinding it out against your opponent. Bring in your Loris when you absolutely have to, and adjust your game plan just to make sure that you can keep making more and more tokens with your Retrofit or Foundry. If you're still with me right now, I'm gonna go enjoy the rest of 4th of July with my family and friends today. For those of you out there who got to see this, I hope you also have fun with this. But seriously, give this deck a try. If you're a fan of Thopters like I am, you will definitely feel so satisfied once you smash through to your opponent after you go above their creatures with cards like Invasion of Kaladesh that nobody ever plays really in this format. And I assure you, when you get that win and shock your opponent, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone. And just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.